Today on The Journey with Steve DeWitt.
God is all the time rescuing us, taking care of us, meeting our needs, even when we don't ask Him to. So let's let Samson lead us to Christ, an imperfect, faulted judge, pointing to the Lamb of God and the Savior of the world.
There are times God calls us to a great task despite our weaknesses. I'm Tim Svoboda, and today on The Journey, Pastor Steve DeWitt presents a paradox of weakness and strength. We'll see how outward appearances can't hide inner mishaps as we examine the character of a man with a divine calling. Our message today is titled, Samson, the Weakest Man in the Bible, and it's the first part of a new message from our series, Set Free, Judges. You'll also find it online at thejourney.fm. But now, here's Steve DeWitt.
In our series on Judges, we have now come to one of the most enigmatic men in all of the Bible. There is so much to admire in this guy, and there is so much that is appalling about him. In this way, I think Samson is somewhat like all of the other judges that we've already studied. Like Ehud, who was a secret assassin, like Barak, who wasn't willing to go into battle unless the woman prophetess went with him, like Gideon, who required fleeces even though God told him what to do, like Jephthah, who was a great warrior but made a very foolish vow. Samson's like all of them, but Samson takes the cake. I mean, Samson is the greatest and the worst example of what a judge is like. He is the strongest man in the Bible, and he is the weakest man in the Bible. He was all muscle and hormones and no wisdom or character. He's Superman and the Riddler. He's Arnold Schwarzenegger and Hugh Hefner, all wrapped up into one. Now this morning, we are going to tackle chapters 13 and 14. There is a lot of text, so like we've done before, we're going to hit the most critical portions of the story, given the time constraints that we have. Judges 13 is the sixth and the final and the greatest oppression that Israel faces. Remember, there is trouble coming on two different fronts. If we look at the map, we have on the east, we have what Jephthah was dealing with, and we studied that last week. On the west now, we have another front, and this is where the Philistines are. The Philistines were a coastal people. They weren't technically Canaanites, but they lived in Canaan, and they were very, very aggressive. So up in this, what is now the modern-day Gaza Strip, when you hear the Gaza Strip in the news, that's where the Philistines lived. So we have the Ammonites on the east, we have the Philistines on the west. They've already been mentioned in Judges. They're mentioned in chapter 3, and a guy named Shamgar was the judge that defeated the Philistines. But now years have gone by, and they have regrouped. They've become very powerful. They've become very prominent. And they had a very different strategy when it came to oppressing a people or dominating a people. You recall that the other Canaanites would come and they would plunder. Remember the Midianites, they were like locusts. They just came, they invaded the land, they took everything in sight. The Philistines were much more interested in a long-term rule. And so they would go in, they would live amongst the people, they would intermarry with the people, they would seek to compromise the people, and by doing that, they just would sort of intermingle in a way that they could dominate over a long term. Here's a great way to illustrate the difference. The Canaanites raped the women. The Philistines married the women. See the difference? And that was the strategy the Philistines employed. So we pick it up, chapter 13, verse 1. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Boy, that sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Haven't we heard that before? Again and again, the story is the same. God brings a deliverer. Peace and prosperity comes. What do God's people do when they have peace and prosperity? They forget about God, and the spiritual climate of the people goes down. And so God brings trouble. Why? Because he wants them to love him, to worship him. He alone is worthy of it. So he brings trouble to get their attention. And every other time that we've seen this, the people have cried out to God and said, "Oh God, help us." We saw that with Jephthah, where they got rid of their idols and God couldn't stand their misery any longer. Do you remember? Now, something is very different in this part of the story, though. You'll see in verse 1, it says that they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. We would expect, based on our now scholar status as judges, scholars, we would expect to see, "And the people cried out to God in their misery," or something like that. There's nothing. It just moves to verse 2, a certain man of Zorah. In other words, it goes right into how God delivered them. And I wonder if maybe we're not on kind of an important point right here. Does God only deliver us or provide for us when we ask him to? No. And we ought to be glad that he doesn't. Because you and I both go through our day all the time where we're not thinking about God. We're expecting God to meet some need in our life. We don't even think about it until he doesn't. God is all the time rescuing us, taking care of us, meeting our needs, even when we don't ask him to. And I'm glad for that. Very glad. Israel needed help. They didn't even realize how much they needed help. And yet God knew it. And out of his love for his people, he now is sending a deliverer. And the story picks up in verse 2. And basically chapter 13 is the supernatural announcement of a coming birth. That's chapter 13. We're not going to read all of it, but we will begin in verse 2. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are sterile and childless, but you are going to conceive and have a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, set apart to God from birth. And he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines." So, something kind of new here. We've not seen this before. There's a certain man living in Zorah. His name's Manoah. He's got a wife. The wife is never named in the story. She is childless. One day, the angel of the Lord appears to her and says, "You know what? You're childless. Yeah, I know that. You're sterile. I know that. Thank you very much. But you're going to have a son. And these are the conditions. You're not to do this, you're not to do that, you're not to do that. He's going to be a Nazirite from birth." And this woman joins Sarah in Genesis 18, Elizabeth in Luke 1, and Mary in Luke 1 as childless women who have an angel appear to them and say, "You are going to have a son." And this son, it says, is to be a Nazirite. And this is important to the story of Samson. Samson was to be a Nazirite. We don't use that language very much, so let's just talk about what it means to be a Nazirite. You can read it later. Numbers 6, 1 through 13 tells about a Nazirite vow. A Nazirite vow was something that you did in order to dedicate yourself to God. And there were prescribed ways to do it. In fact, the word Nazirite means consecrated or set apart. So a Nazirite vow made a commitment to God. I want to be dedicated to you, and in order to do that, I will meet the conditions of the Nazirite vow, and there were 3 of them. First of all, they were not to eat or drink anything that came from grapes or raisins. And you can imagine all of the categories of drinks that might include, all right? Secondly, you would not cut your hair, ever. Third, Old Testament law said that they were not allowed to touch a dead body. If they did that, then they became unclean in a ceremonial way. That's what it meant to be a Nazirite. Now, a Nazirite is different than being a Nazarene. Jesus was a Nazarene. That means that he was from Nazareth. Nazirite is completely different. They sound similar, but they don't mean the same thing, so don't get confused on that. Now, later on in the story, the angel appears to Manoah as well and says, you're going to have a son, and he's to be a Nazirite, and these are the things that you're supposed to do. I'm skipping through now a section of chapter 13. We get to verse 17, though, and this is what it says. Then Manoah inquired of the angel of the Lord, "What is your name, so that we may honor you when your word comes true?" He replied, "Why do you ask my name? It is beyond understanding." Then Manoah took a young goat together with the grain offering and sacrificed it on a rock to the Lord. And the Lord did an amazing thing while Manoah and his wife watched. As the flame blazed up from the altar toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame. Seeing this, Manoah and his wife fell with their faces to the ground. Stop there. Manoah says, "What is your name? We want to honor you when what you tell us comes to be true. We want to know what your name is." And of course, Manoah doesn't realize that this is the angel of the Lord. And we saw the angel of the Lord with Gideon. Do you recall? And what did we see that the angel of the Lord was? It wasn't simply an angel like Gabriel or Michael. This was actually who? Jesus Christ, known as a Christophany, an Old Testament appearance of the second person of the Trinity, who we now know as Jesus. Here is Jesus in the Old Testament. Jesus himself appears to this couple and says, "You're going to have a child." And they don't realize who he is. And so he just says, "Hey, by the way, what's your name?" I did that with people before this service. It's a very common thing to do, isn't it? "Hey, what's your name?" Because you learn a lot about somebody by hearing their name. Their last name. You hear what, maybe ethnic background they are, or the way that they say their name. "My name's June," something like that. And you say, "Oh, you're visiting, aren't you?" Something like that. You learn a lot by hearing somebody's name. So they ask, "Hey, what is your name so that we can honor you when this comes true?" And I love the response of this, Bethel. This is one of those little Old Testament nuggets that are so great. Here we have Jesus Christ in the Old Testament answering the question, "What is your name?" And you know what he says? Listen, here's the NIV. The NIV translates it this way. "It is beyond understanding." ESV, "It is wonderful." Here's the New Living Translation. It kind of captures this. "You wouldn't understand it if I told you." Oh, I love this. Let this just set on your soul this morning. What is your name? My name is so far beyond your ability to comprehend, I can't even tell you. Think of that. What is Jesus saying there? This is what he's saying. Who I am is so far beyond your ability to comprehend and understand that I can't exactly find the words to describe it. Friends, do you realize that what we know about God, all of the things that we know about God, every theology that has ever been written in the history of the church, all of it are categories that God has chosen to reveal himself in, but he is far greater than even the categories that he has delivered to us. Our understanding is like this. This is how much we know about God, and God is massive. So that when we say, "Hey, I want to know who you are," God goes, "You can't handle it. You couldn't. I will blow your mind," is essentially what he's saying there. Like somebody who takes a little sip of Lake Michigan and thinks that maybe they understand Lake Michigan. No, you've only tasted of it. And this morning, the most mature, godly, theologically informed person in this room right now is only understanding the very smallest aspect of who God is. And someday we're going to stand before him and we will have a greater capacity to understand than we even begin to have now. And guess what? Even then, he's going to blow our minds. Oh, that's my God. That's a God I can get excited about. That's a characteristic of God that fires me up. And I wonder today, as you come here, is this your God? Does your God fire you up? Is there a mystery to it? Or do you have it all figured out and your theology's all figured out and there's nothing new you can tell me about God? I got God in my own little box. No, you don't. You're sipping Lake Michigan at best. You wouldn't understand if I told you. David writes in Psalm 139, verse 6, "Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain." Well, verse 24, this woman gives birth to a son, just like the angel said, and she named him Samson. He grew up and the Lord blessed him, it says, now verse 25, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he was in Mahana Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol. he grew up and the Lord blessed him. Does that language sound like anybody else, maybe in the Bible? Who was born and the Spirit of God blessed him and he grew up. Does that sound like anybody else? Of course, our Savior Jesus Christ, Luke 2, and the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom and the grace of God was upon him. So from childhood, Samson, God is with Samson. God is already blessing Samson, even when he's a kid. Now, in verse 25, here's where we are in the story of his life. Samson now is a roughly 20 years old. And we pick up the story in chapter 14, verse 1, and now the real drama begins. Verse 1, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. His father and mother replied, Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me. She's the right one for me. Stop there. Everything we need to know about Samson, we've just discovered in those 4 verses right there. And this morning what we're going to do is we're going to begin to chart the character and the life of Samson with his strengths and his weaknesses. Samson is the strongest man in the Bible, and he is the weakest man in the Bible. And we see it right away. Here we have Samson who lives in Zorah, and Zorah was right near the edge of Philistine territory. So he grew up kind of on the property line between the Israelites and the Philistines. It's about an hour walk from Zorah to Timnah. But Timnah is a Philistine city. And right away, we got to ask ourselves, Samson, what are you doing hanging out with the Philistines? What are you doing going down there and fraternizing with the enemy? I don't think he was there witnessing, folks. He was there to have a good time. In fact, we come to find out he's actually scoping chicks. That's what he's doing. And we see, it says, then he sees a Philistine woman. And the text does not give her name, but this is a pattern now that we find with Samson. There's 3 women that Samson is going to be connected with in his story. We have this Philistine woman who lives in Timnah. There is a Philistine prostitute who lives in Gaza. And then there is a very famous Philistine woman, and her name is Delilah. That's right. Delilah is coming. Well, here he sees a woman, and he concludes, this woman is to be my wife. Now, I want you to see something in the text here that just is so typical of Samson. Look at verse 7. In verse 7, it says that he went down and talked with her, and he liked her. He hadn't even talked to her. And he goes to his parents and says, I have seen a woman, and she is going to be my wife. This was lust at first sight, is what it was with Samson. In fact, this is now weakness number 1 as we chart this. For Samson, he's dominated by sensual desires. His life, he is just living for sensuality. He just sees a woman, and lust and desire fills his heart. Reason goes out the window, and he wants to have her as his wife. And we're going to spend more time later, not today, but another time, talking about lust and talking about loving appearances. But I just want to note the foolishness that we see with Samson here. He's dominated by sensual desires. He's dominated by lust. He sees her and he says to himself, that woman is going to be my wife. Here's how one commentator translates the little phrase that he says to his parents. He says this, let me tell you, I saw a woman in Timnah. Note the emphasis there. I saw a woman in Timnah. And of course, right now, who does he sound like? The average American male, right? Who sees and desires evaluating a woman based solely on her physical appearance. And for some reason, men, we have failed to realize how perilous this is. And yet that's very, very common. I say in counseling regularly, I say, if beauty was what made for a happy marriage, then the most beautiful people would have the happiest marriages. And the most beautiful people, of course, are the Hollywood celebrities. They would have the most blessed marriages of all. And yet, what do we find to be true with the Hollywood celebrities? Couple months out the door, right? Doesn't work that way. Just proves the point. Again, Samson never learned that lesson. Never. It's repeated again and again in his life. He wanted her now, and he demanded that his parents go along with what he wanted. And that gets really to the second weakness that we find in Samson, and that is that he has no regard for authority in his life. No regard. And of course, we begin with God. God had made it very clear to the Israelites that they were not to intermarry with the people of Canaan, not to do it. Did Samson know it? Absolutely, he knew it. And yet, he did not care. Or we might say it this way, that he cared more for the satisfaction of his own desires than doing what God wanted him to do in his life. And of course, we have to talk about his parents. Now, he's 20 years old. Is he in the home still? I don't know, but he obviously is under their authority, and he comes to them and he says, I want to marry a Philistine woman. And here you have this couple. Imagine if the angel of the Lord appeared to you and said, you're going to have a very special son. All of your life, all of this child's life, you're thinking about the fact that, wow, he is really going to be something special. He's going to do great things for God. He's got a great future. And then one day he walks in the door and says, I want to marry a Philistine. They are devastated by this. All of their dreams gone. What do you mean you want to marry a Philistine? We don't marry Philistines. We're to marry Israelites. Isn't there an acceptable woman amongst the Israelites? Look at all, there's hundreds of thousands of them. There's got to be one there. One, maybe. Why would you marry a Philistine? But he doesn't care about his parents' wishes. And of course, they are not the first or the last parents to struggle with a child who doesn't care about God or doesn't care about their parents' wishes. We have this right here in the room today. And there is a heartache in your life, and you say to yourself, all my dreams are gone, all what I wanted, it's out the window. My child is not following God's will. Well, I've got good news for you today. There is a grace for parents in this passage. Look at verse 4. The writer of Judges, probably Samuel, parenthetically now says this: his parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. Did you hear that? You say, well, that doesn't sound like much of a grace. This is a wonderful grace. Listen, from their perspective, all they hear is their beloved son, the apple of their eye, the prophetically given child, now walking away from the Lord. But from God's perspective, he is behind this in a way because he wants confrontation. Samson's got to get in there and start killing Philistines. And so he is working through the foolishness of Samson to accomplish his purpose for Samson and to save his people.
You're listening to The Journey with Pastor Steve DeWitt, and the first part of a message titled, Samson, the Weakest Man in the Bible. This entire message is available online at thejourney.fm. Every day, God's love and hope reaches listeners around the world through The Journey, and it's only possible because of friends like you. So today, we're asking you to join us in something bigger than ourselves. Just as God's grace has carried you through your own journey, your support helps carry that same hope to someone else who needs it. Become a monthly partner today by calling 844-7-JOURNEY. That's 844-756-8763. Or give online at thejourney.fm. And to say thanks for your support, we'd like to send you a copy of David Platt's book, Radical. And in this book, Platt dives deeper into what following Jesus looks like today. The author challenges Christians living in ambitious, consumer-driven societies to truly walk in Jesus' footsteps and obey the Great Commission no matter the cost. So call today at 844-7-JOURNEY or visit thejourney.fm. I'm Tim Svoboda, inviting you to join us next time as Pastor Steve DeWitt brings us to the end of the message, Samson, the weakest man in the Bible. That's coming up Friday on The Journey. The Bible teaching of Steve DeWitt is brought to you by The Journey.